Victim Zero versus the Narcissist. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. As part of my work explaining to you narcissism and how it functions, I regularly utilize real-life examples because I know from your feedback that this really helps reinforce the various manipulations, aspects of the dynamic, reactions of the victim, so that you gain a real visceral understanding. I'm taking another example, and it serves two purposes. If you were to read this article yourself, you might not necessarily pick up on, prior to being involved with my work, what really drives this man's behaviour. Having accessed my work and receiving my commentary, you gain a deeper understanding of what drives this man to have behaved in the way that he has. Furthermore, as part of your understanding of narcissism, you're able to receive real-life examples of the concepts that I talk about. Thus, you get a double whammy of education. This is an article that appeared in The Times, an investigation involving Katie Gatens. The headline reads, "I knew my ex-husband was a rapist, so I helped his new wife convict him." Now, it's sometimes the case that someone who is a victim of a narcissist looks to garner information about that individual from other parties. To some extent, this is helpful and is the pursuit of the truth-seeker trait, perhaps speaking to an ex-wife or an ex-husband, maybe a family member, to find out more about the way this person has behaved to give validation to what you have experienced. And that does provide some assistance. However, it is a breach of no contact, and a victim needs to be careful about taking this step. Because first of all, there's no guarantee that the other victim will necessarily provide assistance. Secondly, it's a breach of no contact, which means you're increasing your emotional thinking because you're doing something in relation to the narcissist, probably talking about the narcissist with somebody else and thinking about them. Thus, you're entering three arenas of interaction, causing your emotional thinking to increase. It can cause you to then want to take steps to exact revenge against the narcissist when it's not the time to do so. You need to get your emotional thinking down, and learning perhaps of the harm that has been meted out to somebody else results in the corruption of your empathic trait of justice, the corruption of your narcissistic trait of anger and defiance, so that you want to get back at the narcissist, but it's not the right time to do so. It can also come to the attention of the narcissist that you're undertaking these investigative works, which will, of course, threaten the narcissist's sense of control, and in the circumstances could result in you receiving a malign hoover. Ordinarily, you are much better focused on your own recovery, the knowledge that you've dealt with the narcissist, and moving on with the implementation and maintenance of a no-contact regime. Understandably, there are instances where people want further information, and in this instance, the victims work together to bring about the implementation of justice against this individual. This is a tightrope that they walked. There are disadvantages that come with it, but fortunately for them, they were able to obtain a successful outcome through the application of justice upon this individual. The case study provides you lots of instances of narcissistic indicators, manipulations, and the dynamic between narcissist and victims. In an oak-panelled courtroom in Edinburgh, 7 women sat on a wooden bench in the public gallery, held hands and sobbed with relief, as in the dock below them, Aaron Carson Swan was finally convicted of rape. Among them were his victims, an ex-wife, her friend, and an ex-girlfriend. They were joined by his sister and the woman who supported them throughout, Swan's first wife, Natalie Collins. The 39-year-old had made her own allegation of rape against him in 2006, but a jury did not believe her, and it appeared that the chance to have him convicted for what she claims he did to her was lost. However, almost 2 decades on, she was brought back in a courtroom again with the man she claims subjected her to years of terrifying coercive control, manipulation, this time in the hope she could get justice for other women. When Judge Lord Weir announced to the High Court in Edinburgh that Swan, 39, had been found guilty of 6 charges, 4 counts of rape, 1 of sexual assault and 1 of abusive behaviour against 3 women, she felt finally vindicated. Her case, though, will never be retried. I felt like I was victim zero. I was the beginning of this, Collins says. I felt incredibly relieved that finally he couldn't hurt anybody else. Today, she and the other women tell their story for the first time. They reveal how a man previously on the sex offenders register for having a sexual relationship with a minor, lack of emotional empathy, lack of boundary recognition, sense of entitlement, went on to commit offences over 2 decades. And they tell how they've become a sisterhood to help each other come to terms with how Swan's controlling behaviour had ruined their lives and finally bring him to justice. Swan is to be sentenced in March and may now be placed under a lifelong restriction order, meaning he is considered such a risk he must be monitored for the rest of his life. Collins had known Aaron Swan for a year when they married in 2003. Swift marriage, red flag. She was aged 18. She was brought up in Scarborough in a strict religious family. Her parents ran a musical instrument shop, and she had 4 siblings in what she described as a happy childhood. But when she met Swan at a party, she was swept away by his good looks. She knew he had a reputation for being awful to his previous girlfriend, but when they met, he had found God and now shared her religious beliefs, mirroring presence of emotional thinking. The relationship moved quickly, demonstrating once again how the narcissist looks to bring the victim under control quickly in order to get hold of the fuel, the character traits, the residual benefits. She did not believe in sex before marriage, but Swan pressured her, lack of boundary recognition, and declared his devotion, flattery, a coercive tactic known as love bombing. Although being showered with affection can seem positive in the early part of a relationship, when it is intense, it has been linked to abusive behaviour. He wanted to be with me all the time, monopolization of time. He was demanding my time and energy, sense of entitlement, saying he loved me, early declaration of love, sense of entitlement. She admits she was naive, and so relented to his demands. Here, the predator has found an ideal victim, young, easy to manipulate, naturally fogged by emotional thinking. He refused to use contraception, lack of accountability, and she became pregnant within 6 months. Early pregnancy, assertion of control, sense of entitlement. When they married, the church ceremony was hastily arranged and then rearranged after Collins gave birth to their daughter early. Afterwards, Swan admitted that he had cheated on her on more than one occasion. Infidelity, provocation. He kept breaking down in tears, pity play, and telling me I had to save him, pity play. It was a strategy to increase his control and convince her that she needed him. She found it difficult to maintain friendships, isolation, especially with women, and distrusted others. I became isolated from them and my parents very quickly, she says. This, of course, is a common manoeuvre of the narcissist. By removing your support networks, you become easier to control. It also means that somebody who might have an inkling that something isn't right is removed from having any influence over you so that you become easier to control. Swan's controlling behaviour only grew. He was telling me I was worthless. This was now devaluation, belittlement. Telling me I was worthless and useless. That other women were more attractive than me. Malign triangulation. I started to believe I didn't have any value. I thought no one would want to be my friend anyway, says Collins. She says that friends tried to help her to leave Swan. He manipulated her to stay, preventative hoovers. I felt I was letting them down. I didn't know how to explain to anyone that I couldn't break free. Collins felt powerless, worried about the shame of being seen as a divorced young mother. Things reached a head in 2004 when she found out that Swan, aged 20, was involved with a 15-year-old girl. After confronting him, threat to control, Collins reported him to the police, and he was convicted of having a sexual relationship with a minor. He was placed on the sex offenders register for 5 years. She says he was manipulative. At this point, I am just constantly forgiving him, thinking that maybe my love can save him. Corruption of the love devotee trait through emotional thinking, and he is very broken and fragile, she says. Corruption of her empathic traits of compassion and caring. Certain narcissists, commonly mid-range, present as broken, as vulnerable, as fragile, needing to be saved. And of course, the empath, with their emotional thinking, steps in to that saviour role. Again, her family tried to convince her to leave Swan. In the end, I stopped talking to any of my family or friends, she says. His conviction hugely isolated me. I thought friends would judge me for still being with him. I felt all I could do was what he told me. In 2005, when Collins was pregnant with her second child, the couple were spending their nights in separate rooms in their family house, when Swan raped her in her sleep. Lack of boundary recognition, manipulation, sense of entitlement, absence of emotional empathy. Their son was born a week later, 3 months prematurely. She reported the rape to police a week later. Their new baby was so unwell that Collins spent the next 5 months living in the antenatal unit in hospital in Middlesbrough, with their son in intensive care and her daughter with her. It gave Collins the space she needed to finally leave Swan for good. Note that by no longer being with him, there was a reduction in the amount of time she was physically spending with him. There was a reduction in communication, a reduction in her doing things for him, meaning she was staying out of those arenas of interaction far more, meaning that there will have been a drop in her emotional thinking, which enabled her to start to use logic to leave him. Swan was tried in 2006 and presented evidence in court that the couple had had consensual sex after the alleged rape. It was true. Collins says she had been coerced into it. Manipulation. With a new baby in hospital and a traumatized toddler, I was really vulnerable, she says. The jury found him not guilty after a process that deeply distressed Collins. She was devastated. With sole custody of the 2 children, she moved with them to the northeast, while Swan moved to Jedburgh in the Scottish borders. Motivated by her horrific experience with Swan, Collins established the Own My Life course, intended to help victims of domestic abuse and sexual violence. She had no idea that years later the course would end up helping victims of her ex-husband. Collins had heard nothing from Swan for 15 years when her daughter, whom we have named Isabel, turned 17 and began asking questions about her father. Isabel found him on Facebook, then messaged him and a woman called Amy, Swan's sister, who she knew was her aunt. Collins was horrified, but allowed Isabel to continue to carry on the conversations with her supervision, breach of no contact. Then Swan asked to meet Isabel in person, Hoover, triangulation with child. Alarm bells rang. Collins called the police and Amy, with whom she'd always had a good relationship during the marriage. They had a long conversation. There was a lot to catch up on. She told me everything, Collins says. When I called her, we both cried. Amy, the sister, told Collins that Swan had moved through the borders and continued his predatory behaviour. Unsurprising, of course. He had married again, assertion of control, to a woman we have named Olivia. She was 16 when they met. Assertion of control over vulnerable individual. After 9 years of marriage, Olivia and Swan were divorcing, and she had reported 2 rapes, manipulation, lack of emotional empathy, lack of boundary recognition, sense of entitlement, by him to the police. I was horrified, Collins says. My life is dedicated to addressing sexual and domestic violence, and so to some degree, I felt I had to be a resource to the women involved to stop him. I felt like I had a responsibility. I was on a mission. Now, this is a breach of no contact, of course, but her emotional thinking will have dropped to a much lower level after the 15 years of having nothing to do with him. Of course, it will have been increased as a consequence of her daughter's involvement with him and the discussions that she had with Amy. Amy, the sister, put Collins in contact with Olivia, and a few weeks later the three women and their respective children met for a day out in the park. Their children, all related, quickly got on and played together. Collins said, "We started becoming a kind of weird extended family." Olivia and Collins found similarities in their stories. Both had been attacked while asleep, lack of emotional empathy, manipulation. Both were coercively controlled, manipulation, and both had become isolated from friends and family, isolation. Worse, though, Olivia was living with the guilt that her former best friend Hannah had also been attacked by Swan on a night out in 2013. She had been staying over at the couple's house and was asleep in a guest bedroom when Swan came in and raped her. Assertion of control, absence of emotional empathy, absence of boundary recognition, sense of entitlement. It had never been reported to the police. Before that night, Hannah was due to be a bridesmaid at their wedding. Olivia was devastated when she found out that her best friend had had sex with her fiancé, infidelity, but Swan controlled the narrative, managing to convince Olivia the blame solely fell on Hannah. Triangulation, blame shifting. Swan persuaded Olivia to keep Hannah away from the wedding. Hannah had also been controlled by him. She says that during the attack, Swan whispered in her ear that if she told anyone, his wedding to Olivia would be cancelled and it would be her fault. Threat, use of guilt. The assault, which Hannah did report to a rape charity at the time, changed her life. "I fell into the deepest depression I've ever experienced," Hannah says. "I dropped out of college. I lost my university offer. I completely lost myself as a person." When Olivia left Swan, Hannah noticed on Facebook and got back in touch, wanting to repair their friendship. Olivia persuaded Hannah to report her rape to the police. "I've always felt immense guilt for not reporting it at the time because I felt like maybe I could have prevented other victims," Hannah says. Swan was still in Jedburgh, now with a partner we've named Becky, another intimate partner primary source. The women suspected Becky was already having doubts about Swan, and they suspected that they too, or rather she too, had become isolated from friends and family. In June 2022, Amy invited Becky to attend the 12-week Own My Life course. By the end of the course, she too had left Swan, recognising his abuse, and reported him to the police in August 2022 for 2 rapes. Swan was arrested and charged for the attacks on all 3 women in 2022. Collins did not meet Hannah or Becky before the trial. Olivia too kept contact to a minimum, staying away from Collins until she'd given statements to the police. She says, "I didn't want it to be seen as colluding with other people." There was a complicated dynamic between the women. Each had experienced a similar trauma, but were forced to maintain a distance because of the trial. All were slowly building the agency to stand up to their rapist. Collins showed her support by travelling to the court in Edinburgh every day, furiously taking notes from the public gallery for those who could not attend. Although they knew each other through the other women, Collins and Hannah did not meet in person until the second day of the trial, after Hannah had given evidence. "We immediately hugged and went for a coffee," Hannah says. "I had no idea he had done the same to her. She's been a huge support, especially during the trial. She's an incredible lady." The women say that Collins had supporting them throughout, emotional empathy. After the trial, they walked back to Edinburgh Waverley Station together and took a group photo. "It just felt right to mark the day somehow," she says. They are planning another meeting soon with their children. There is a low conviction rate for rape. Only 2.1% of the reports result in a prosecution in England and Wales. In Scotland, about half of the cases that even get that far end in acquittal. Collins says the women knew that if they brought their case together, it would be much stronger. "It is not shocking that a man has raped a woman," she says, "but it is shocking that 20 years of failings have led to him raping lots of women." In November, a jury found Swan guilty of 6 offences. He was cleared of 1 charge of rape against Becky. Olivia, Becky and Hannah sobbed throughout their evidence. Amy gave evidence too, corroborating the accounts of Olivia and Becky, who had confided to her about their experiences with Swan. The women suspect there may be many other victims who have yet to report to the police. This is undoubtedly true. The judge, Lord Weir, described the crimes as a succession of serious and concerning offences perpetrated against 3 different complainers in different circumstances. When the verdict was announced on a grey November day, it had been 17 years since Swan was acquitted of rape against Collins. Outside the court, Hannah hugged Colin. She said to me, "My justice is your justice." Although the women have been united over the court case, they are still struggling to come to terms with what has happened to them. No one jumped for joy when the verdict was announced, Colin says. Amy has lost a brother, and the relationship with the rest of her family is fragile. Olivia says, "You can't sugarcoat it. Reporting a rape is awful. I can understand why more women don't do it." Despite this, Colin says that the actions of Swan will not destroy us. He won't create a narrative for any of us. We won't be defined by the awfulness of it. After years under his control, the women have supported each other. We collectively as a sisterhood care and love one another, Colin says. That's how we break his power over all of us. It's worth adding that also breaking his power is to maintain a no-contact regime. A useful example there of a narcissist and his serial behaviours against different intimate partner victims, showing the similarity of the way that he acted towards them and varying different aspects of the manipulations and the narcissistic dynamic. It also shows how emotional thinking got in the way, and I've highlighted to you also the risks associated with such activity. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.